Are people in general good, or are most of them mostly evil, or at least selfish? Even if you haven't actually given it much thought, you most likely have some opinions about what people are like. You may even think that we are the way we are because of a nature or essence that makes all people more or less similar in this regard. Such ideas or conceptions of humanity influence how we think about ethics. It even influences what aspects of ethics we emphasize. Such views also can be used to answer one of the biggest questions of ethics: why is there evil? That is, why do some people do evil things, and why do we at least sometimes act against our better knowledge? But before going deeper into this, let me first remind you to consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the thumbs up button. Are most people, because of their nature or for some other reason, mostly good or not? Some people, and I have to admit that I was one of them when I was young, think that people are in some ways selfish, motivated by self-interest. There are, of course, at least two different versions of this view called egoism. Psychological egoism is the view that we are all motivated by self-interest, so that we try to do things that benefit us. Even if a person who apparently selflessly sacrifices their own life in a heroic last stand of a battle to allow their comrades to retreat to safety, can be thought to be acting out of self-interest. They don't even have to believe in a reward in the afterlife to do this, although that is of course one possible reason for their action. It could be just that they want to feel heroic and go down in a glorious blaze like a cartoon character. This may not actually be in their best interest, but that doesn't matter. All that matters is that at the time it feels to them like it is. And if this kind of explanation can be given even for such a heroic act, no doubt a similar explanation can be given for any other behavior. Which kind of means that this explanation is pretty useless. It doesn't really explain any of the individual actions taken. Why did this person, out of all the people in that situation, choose to do precisely that out of other possible choices? The same explanation based on selfishness could even be used for completely opposite actions. Consider this scenario. A customer comes to the counter at the shop, noticing that the cash register is open, and the shopkeeper or cashier is occupied with some other matter a short distance away. The customer could now easily grab some cash from the register without being seen. The obviously selfish choice would be to steal money from the open cash register. The apparently moral act to inform the cashier about the open register so that they will close it would be, in this view, also explainable the same way as the hero example earlier. The customer will get to feel morally good about themselves, for example. But if both choices can supposedly be explained with self-interest, the explanation doesn't really explain anything, or add to our understanding. It is, I suspect, mostly an expression of a cynical attitude. Ethical egoism is an actual ethical theory, which may or may not be supported along with psychological egoism, so one can subscribe to either one as well as both, or, of course, neither. The claim of ethical egoism is that one ought to behave selfishly because this will allegedly be the moral way to behave. Some may try to argue that such behavior will lead to the benefit of all. I'm not saying this is plausible. It may be rational to act selfishly, of course, and rationality is usually a requirement for philosophical ethics because, obviously enough, philosophy is about rational behavior in general. Other than that, your initial reaction to this claim may be skeptical. But if you think similarly to Plato and Aristotle, for example, you might see that this kind of egoism might not be completely implausible. Let me put it this way. As you can rationally understand that it is wrong to cause needless suffering, then for you to cause someone needless suffering would go against your own morals, which would trouble you psychologically. So, for you to act morally, according to your own ethical understanding, would also be acting with your own interests in mind. This would be one way to understand ethical egoism. According to this view, for a person to do evil would be for them to harm themselves, and they would only do that out of ignorance or irrationality. Doing what you truly want to do is to do good. That is how I have once understood the moral code, do what thou wilt. In this, I of course assumed that what at least most people truly want would be good. This clearly shows a certain conception of humanity. This view that humans tend to be inherently good is more commonly associated with altruism. Altruism means a kind of self-sacrificing behavior to help others. It can mean literally sacrificing one's own life, but can also mean a lesser sacrifice of one's time, for example. But the idea is that it is helping others for no benefit to oneself and even at a cost to oneself. This can be seen as a psychological theory, which has been supported by natural sciences, at least to some extent. For example, Richard Dawkins famously wrote about the selfishness of genes, which actually causes animals to behave altruistically. They are the more likely to do so, the more closely they are related to the one being helped. This apparent altruism is an evolutionary tactic that increases the likelihood of the survival of the genes, because the genes are shared by the individual doing the helping and the one being helped. So, by increasing the other individual's chances of survival, the helping individual is actually helping the survival of the genes it is itself carrying. From the point of view of the gene, the behavior is thus selfish. In ethics, altruism can be seen as a supererogatory act, which I have already discussed in a different video. See the link in the description. In the least, it is usually seen as a particularly praiseworthy behavior. Stories of altruistic behavior tend to be emotionally evoking, whether just short anecdotes of young people jumping into a flooding river to rescue drowning dogs, or a full-length movie of an unarmed war hero risking his own life to rescue wounded comrades. Most of us clearly appreciate this kind of behavior, but we don't typically require it of others. That would seem too much to ask. But those who subscribe to an essentialist view of man, the species, as innately good, may be more inclined to expect such behavior than those essentialists who think that we are all innately bad, or at least selfish in a narrow sense. One's views on ethics may also be influenced by such assumptions of human nature. Those who believe we are inclined toward good may be more likely to accept virtuism, the ethical view that focuses on the character of the person more than individual acts or behavior. The idea is that good people tend to also do good, but of special interest to us here is that people can change. Virtues can be practiced and learned, but to practice requires the desire to be good, better than one would be without practice. According to Christianity, humans were created in the image of God, so we can be expected to try to be good. Unfortunately, We are no longer in the original state, but because of the original sin we suffer from a fallen nature. So, despite wanting to be good, we typically fail and sin, which is why God's mercy is required for salvation. It is also why we should not be quick to negatively judge others. Although this is a religious way of thinking, it conveys important moral points. We all fail to live up to moral requirements and should keep that in mind when blaming others for their shortcomings. The Christian view of mankind is usually connected to deontological ethics that focus on doing our duty and obeying rules, such as the Ten Commandments, the Golden Rule, and others. Such duty-based ethical views, even more generally, place a lot of emphasis on intent, as opposed to merely looking at the consequences of an act. Deontological norms tend to emphasize restrictions, telling us what not to do. But what matters most from this point of view is what was the intention behind the act. I will illustrate the point with the following scenarios. Scenario 1. You bake a cake and bring it to work for everyone to eat. Your boss also has a piece and soon after suffers an anaphylactic reaction, suffocating to death. You had used peanut butter in the cake, having no idea that it might cause harm. Scenario 2. You bake a cake for work as above, but specifically add peanut butter because you know your boss is allergic to peanuts and you hate them enough to want them to die. The only difference between the scenarios is your intent, but surely they are morally different cases, are they not? Deontological ethics is not as much about the actual acts or behavior, but more about what kind of motivation caused it. Thus, they forbid acting out of bad intentions, malevolence or ill will, and for the most part simply require acts to be motivated by non-malevolence, the lack of such bad intentions. This means you might not be blamed by deontologists for effectively poisoning your boss with peanut butter if you manage to convince them that it was unintentional. In general, deontological views see negligence as less bad than intentionally doing something harmful. If you cause an accident out of negligence, such as not paying enough attention while driving a car, or failing to properly see to safety issues at the construction site you're managing, you will be held responsible, but only for negligence instead of, say, murder. This is also how the law, at least in Finland, deals with such issues. Consequentialists, utilitarians at least, may not agree with the Finnish law and the deontological morals in their views about negligence. They focus on the actual consequences of an act or of negligence the same way, and they may judge them equally. But they also may emphasize benevolence more than deontologists, paying perhaps more attention to the need to improve conditions or to create good in other ways, instead of just condemning malicious acts. An emphasis on negative commandments may be influenced by a view of humanity as inherently evil, in need of constraining. Emphasizing the requirement of benevolence can mean the requirement to help everyone. Emphasizing non-malevolence can lead to disinterest toward most people and their plight. If you see it as your negative duty only to avoid doing evil, you are not motivated to positively promote good. This is why neither deontological nor the consequentialist ethics seem to be enough alone. You should probably apply them both. Secular humanist ethics, as developed by Paul Kurtz, see mankind as usually motivated by a good will. But Kurtz also urged people to cultivate this goodwill in his aphorisms and maxims, such as express an affirmative attitude toward others and ourselves, and hold people accountable if they have been immoral, protect those they harm, ask for reparations if they are due, be merciful and understanding. According to the secular humanist view, a person can build their own character and live an exuberant, good life. These ideas seem inspired less by utilitarianism than by classical virtue ethics. If mankind is thought of as generally good-natured, the question then arises, whence evil? Why do some people do even horribly evil things sometimes? Aristotle thought that the answer is akrasia, weakness of will. Such people lack self-control. Whereas a perfect philosopher is always able to use his reasoning ability to keep his irrational desires and emotions in check, so that he is not affected by them, many ordinary people are unable to do this. Hannah Arendt famously wrote about the banality of evil, how ordinary citizens can simply follow orders, refusing to take responsibility for their own actions. Some Nazi leaders even used this excuse in famous trials after the Second World War, most famously Adolf Eichmann, after he had finally been brought to trial in 1961. His defense was that he simply did his job and obeyed the law, but by doing so, he made sure that as many Jews as possible were slaughtered using industrialized methods in the disgusting death camps. Apparently, blind obedience to authorities, as well as a mindless, uncritical, and faithful acceptance of ideologies, are able to turn people into cold murderers rather effectively. World history is full of examples of this, and we can see the effects of this in the news as well. Terrorist organizations or the Russian military are just some contemporary examples that easily come to mind. It is possible, of course, to discard all notions of human nature and instead embrace the existentialist view that we all have to choose ourselves by making existential, free choices. This can lead to a completely subjectivist ethical view, devoid of any basis for morals outside one's own mind. Arthur Schopenhauer saw will as the cause of suffering and the elimination of will through asceticism as the goal. Friedrich Nietzsche completely disagreed, thinking that suffering is necessary for achieving greatness, which he highly valued. Such highly subjective views are not very useful for someone trying to figure out how to deal with actual, everyday ethical problems. Most philosophers have thought that philosophical ethics are about rationally deciding how to evaluate different possible or actual choices. They have assumed that humans share a common rationality, which makes it possible to come to a consensus about such things. This rationality means that acts or choices can be seen as understandable, acceptable or not, right or wrong. It involves logical rationality, meaning the rules of proper thinking, such as the law of contradiction. A statement and its opposite cannot both be true at once. It also involves epistemic rationality, the pursuit of knowledge using the best possible means, which typically means science. Rationality further involves a practical aspect about the methods and goals. Which are the most effective methods to get what one wants, and what is it that one should want? The latter is about the choice of values, and as you might guess, there is much less of a consensus on this practical aspect of rationality than about the others. I have previously already discussed some different views about values. See the link in the description. And it should be clear that there are disagreements about the choice of values. But some people, it seems, don't even accept logic, which makes any kind of rational discussion with them impossible. But people may be able to change. Whether you think that it is possible or not, of course, depends on your conception of humanity. A person can be a habitual liar, a thief if the opportunity presents itself, or they can be principled, ethically mature. Someone who has principles they identify with and try to live by can be said to have an integrated personality. Such a person can fulfill an authentic life, according to Jean-Paul Sartre and other existentialists, if they can express their ethical creativity freely. This is likely to enable them to live a happy, fulfilling, meaningful life, developing themselves. Their principles have to be in harmony with each other, and their actions have to be in line with their motives. A person with integrity will have self-respect, unlike a person who abandons their principles. Being able to have integrity is to lead a successful life. John Rawls said that one's values are derived from one's life plan. A person with integrity seeking a specific kind of life has a life plan, and their values can be seen in it. This is also what others can judge, deciding whether the person is good or not, worthy of respect or not. The kind of flourishing that a person can achieve when they manage to live their life well was called eudaimonia by Aristotle and presumably other ancient Greeks. Aristotle believed this flourishing to be living in accordance with one's nature. So other living things have their own ways of flourishing, but for humans it becomes possible through what he called theoria, meaning thinking or theoretical pondering. Or doing philosophy, I guess. This is the goal itself, not done instrumentally for some other purpose. Aristotle's belief about eudaimonia is clearly based on his understanding of what it is to be human, and probably wasn't shared by even most of his contemporaries. Perhaps this kind of philosophical goal is a goal for some of us, but clearly not for all humans. People from different cultures and even people from the same culture but with different interests will probably think they can flourish in different ways, perhaps more than one. While Aristotle may have been wrong about the importance of theoretical thinking for all people, part of his idea about the importance of a person's character may be salvageable. A person can flourish if their life fits their character. Aristotle believed that the good character of a person will include some social traits, we might call extroversion these days, but more important than that, he thought that one can practice and improve one's character or personality. We can learn to become more virtuous, so that we will tend to behave more the way we wish to, and through practice it can become like a second nature to us, as the saying goes. Here's a very simple example. I am prone to depression and very much an introvert myself, but I have practiced smiling when talking to people, and it no longer takes much effort to do so. If you think you should perhaps be nicer to people, you can make it your goal to always try to say something nice to the people you meet. This may seem fake, but so what if the purpose is good? Fake it till you make it. I have just one last thing to say about how the conception of humanity affects one's ethical views. It has to do with the idea of freedom. Immanuel Kant, for example, thought that freedom in the ethical sense consists of being able to follow the rational moral law. On a related note, Juhani Sarsila, one of my teachers, begins his book Being a Man, the Roman Virtues, as a contribution to moral philosophy by pointing out a fundamental difference in the views of humanism and anti-humanism with regard to autonomy or autarky. Humanists from antiquity onwards have considered virtue very important. This is connected to the idea of self-determination, a view about freedom, that we can at least try to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. But anti-humanists, such as structuralists like Levi-Strauss, Althusser and Foucault, have considered this idea to be mere self-deception, as according to them, our actions are determined by social, economic and psychological structures. We have no self-determination. Therefore, we certainly cannot choose our values. We cannot even think outside the proverbial box. That's all for now. See you next time and bye for now. If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.